Hey everybody, welcome back to this next presentation in the Hidden Dimensions of Fatedness in your birth chart, and this has to do of course with the eminence factors which I have shown in previous videos. All of them having to do, all techniques having to do with spear bearers, triplicity rulers of the sect-light and the fortune houses. And the reason I started this video series was of course because of the fascinating statement that whenever there's an eminent chart, then the malefics in them and the benefics in them will harm bystanders more than it does the native himself. So that was the reason why I wanted to investigate this material. So let's get on with it, because the next one, this one will be about if we can actually confirm that we have persons harming other people more than themselves. So then let's have a look at whether or not these charts are harming bystanders. So my investigation is actually whether or not these statements that I've again shown here can be validated, because they seem to be quite important in the sense that images and planets seem to operate differently in eminent charts. And that actually means that, as I've shown in previous videos, that eminence needs to be determined beforehand. I guess this would mean that this might be one of the techniques that could be one of the grand approaches that Robert Schmidt talked about, the universal principles that give sort of an outline of a person's life, something that is actually present in the chart but not necessarily visible by means of normal, regular ways of determining things in a chart. They are intertwined, of course, but there seems to be something going on in the background that makes a person eminent. Which is actually is sort of in opposition with the American dream that simply states that you can be anybody that you like. And true, some people achieve that, going from rags to riches, for instance. But it's also something that can be in a native's chart, and then it's sort of a fate concept happening in your life, and you either work with it or not work with it, but it will make you eminent. So that's an interesting thing about all these fate concepts. They just simply happen and you have to deal with them, or you can profit from them, right? Okay, so let's have a look whether or not this can be validated. So let's first have a look at what Robert Schmidt translated in his wonderful book Definitions and Foundations. This is a quote by Antiochus, in which he says that, referring to the 7 wandering stars, the planes aster, which are the planets we use in astrology, of course, which are opposite to the non-wandering stars, what we now call the fixed stars. And Antiochus says that, and when Kronos is in its own places and conducts its business, which means that it's krematizo, in its chariots, that is, a planet is said to be in its chariot whenever he is in its own sign, its exaltation, or in its bounds, and by being set in a good position, which normally means in a place conducive to business, it benefits the natives, though by assigning an increase for them to the detriment of another. So here we have this fascinating statement that whenever a malefic is in a very good place, then it works in favor of the native and possibly to the detriment of another person. So yeah, this is interesting. But so you can say that when a malefic is well placed, etc., then it can both lead to advancement and high rank, even if it's a malefic, yet possibly harm other people. But the interesting thing is that this applies to people not being eminent as well. So that's interesting. So it's a general principle. You get an inheritance, but that is because somebody died, of course. So that's the sad side of it. The inheritance is a boon, but the death of somebody, possibly someone who you loved, is of course not a very not a happy occasion. So Schmidt said that when a benefic is unfavorably or poorly placed, then its signification will manifest, but it will be with hindrances, troubles, etc. and opposition. So for instance, Venus not in a good place, etc., etc. You do get married, but your family disapproves, for example, or your drunk ex shows up at the wedding and later in life causes a lot of problems in your life, in your marriage as well. So things like that. So that's a benefic not well placed. So benefics poorly placed will contribute to good things, but it is with hindrances, with trouble, etc. And this is what Schmidt said in his basic course part 1. In certain placements in the chart, the benefics can function like malefics and vice versa, but the planets never actually lose their benefic nature or their malefic character. So when a malefic is what Schmidt called a functional benefic, it simply means that the native will profit at someone else's expense. And by the same token, a benefic that is a functional malefic, by being in poor place or not in a strong place, etc., that means that someone else will benefit from that benefic at the native's expense. So it goes both ways, right? But the interesting thing is that when this is the case in any possible chart, then the question is what is going on in the chart of someone who is eminent. So perhaps we need to have a closer look at the eminence factors to try to see whether or not we can say that this harms somebody more than others. But it actually means that whenever somebody is eminent, the scale at which the harm or the beneficence can be done is perhaps bigger than when we are talking about somebody who's not eminent. So what I want to do next is again investigate the principle of eminence and see whether or not there is a hierarchy in it. Some people with certain positions can be more eminent than others, and perhaps there's some sort of hierarchy in it. And yes, we do have such a hierarchy. And this is the one that Ptolemy presented, and I learned it from Robert Zoller's course, the diploma course in medieval astrology. It's lesson 11. The interesting thing is that, of course, this is simply based on the spear-bearing planets for both the lights, be it the sect light or the other one. And this is the hierarchy that Ptolemy presented, and the titles that are given here are the ones that Robert Zoller gave them. So, for instance, the first one, I will not enumerate them all because you can simply read them. You can pause the video and then you can have a look at them. But when we look at the level 1, the God-man, that's the case when both lights are in a masculine image. And both are pivotal, so they are in what we now call the angles of the charts. Or both lights are in masculine images, but only one of them is pivotal. And the spear bearers must be, all of them, the rest of the remaining planets, must be the spear bearing for both the lights. And they also must be in a pivot. And when they are not pivotal, they must aspect the midheaven, because the midheaven, of course, has a lot to do with the standing in society. So, and then he goes further on to say that the native is all the more powerful if the spear bearers are above the ascendant and configured with the pivots, and that has a lot to do because the how do you call it, the hemisphere above the ascendant and the descendant has to do with the day principle. So that's everything that's in the public eye, sort of, and everything that's below the ascendant and the descendant is in private. So yeah, so here you have the definitions given to us by Ptolemy, and Zoller adds that there are innumerable gradations between the 6 levels in this rank of fame paradigm. And you will hardly find any example exactly fitting this principle or these principles. And they sort of blend into each other because you can often have very many principles seen in a chart, and then you can try to put them in one of these. So I just give it to them to you, so you can study this if you like, but there are also problems with it because it's quite difficult to find people really having all these factors. So yeah, so that's interesting. The interesting thing is also that Robert Zoller also first introduced the principle of persons being a slave, which is of course a medieval determination of a chart, whether or not somebody can really rise up above that level of being a subservient person, a person not able to rise in social standing or the social hierarchy very high. So yeah, that's also an interesting thing that he did before he went into this idea of the rank of fame, the 6 levels of the social hierarchy. So, okay, I will not do that here, but I need to address something that is important for this investigation. So let's have a look at that. Now, as Ptolemy talks about, or Zoller talks about the God-man, somebody who is really almost seen as a messiah, seen as a sort of representative of the highest power that we can think of, then perhaps Hitler is an example of such a person, because he really achieved some sort of godlike status, at least for a little while, for a relatively long period of about, let's say, 15 to 20 years, I think. For some people he still does, unfortunately, but he had sort of a messiah-like status. But what's going on with this Ptolemy rank of fame is that these conditions of Ptolemy simply apply and do not apply in this chart, simply because the sun and the moon are not in masculine images. They are both in feminine images, and neither is the sect-like pivotal. The one exception might be the Helios, the sun. It's in the 8th place, but it's very near the descendant, and I've shown in a previous video that when you use equal houses, then yeah, both the sun, all 3 of the planets in the bull, the Sun, Helios, Ares, Mars, and Aphrodite, Venus, are actually in the 7th angle, which makes them strong, right? So, but in this sense, this doesn't apply to the chart of Hitler. So the interesting thing is, when you look closer, you can see that the moon and Jupiter, Selene and Zeus, are both in the fortune descendant, something that Ptolemy fails to take into account. So Ptolemy is not about the fortune angles. As far as I know, he doesn't mention them. He simply used a lot of fortune, and well, there's a lot going on with his take on that, a lot of fortune, but that's not something to discuss here. So yeah, so we then I take a look. What I did was try to form a hypothesis, an idea. Perhaps we should investigate this more closely, because it was also mentioned by several people reacting to these videos. When you use all the manas, all the factors, the 3 factors having to do with eminence, which is the special things that Valence introduced, the lots, special lots, the triplicity rulers, and the fortune houses, then it becomes the case that many people could be eminent. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. So I want to study Hitler's chart now again with these special lots that Valence introduced, which is a lot of exaltation and basis, together with the lot of fortune and a lot of spirit, the lot of the daimon. So yeah, perhaps this helps us in understanding why Hitler got this messiah-like principle. So we need to reinvestigate the eminence factors, I think. So again, here we have the chart of Hitler, and let's try my hypothesis of investigating all the factors having to do with eminence factors, and perhaps they can enhance each other, which might explain why he became such a godlike figure. Let's have a look. So my hypothesis for the moment would be that you first locate the fortune pivots, simply because the teaching of the ancients said that these pivots have more to do with the natal chart and are not the cosmic pivots, as Valens called them. The cosmic pivots are simply the natal angles, and the fortune pivots are the ones related to the lot of fortune. So they seem to have a bigger impact perhaps on the native's life as such. So let's have a look at them. You see, of course, that the ascendant is, of course, the location of the lot of fortune, which is in the crab, and then you find the MC, the fortune MC, you find in Aries, and there we find indeed a planet. That's very important. That's my first thing to look at. Is there perhaps a planet in the fortune MC? If it's so, it might be a very big indication of somebody becoming eminent or being fortunate in some respect, having to do with his walk of life, simply because the MC has to do with your social standing and the things you do to achieve something. So that might be it. So what we see here is that, again, the moon and Jupiter are both the rulers of the natal lot of fortune in Hitler's chart, and they are both together, albeit in the image where they're not happy together at all. But in this case, it might strongly enhance his popularity with other people, simply because it's the 7th place from the lot of fortune. And of course we find Mercury in the fortune MC, in the 10th place relative to the lot of fortune, and that is of course his speaking gift, as some people called it, but he was actually shouting and screaming and whatnot, and it was full of hate, of course, and that has something to do with Aries being the domicile master of this Mercury, I think. Okay. When you have established whether or not there is a planet in the 10th place from fortune, or perhaps one of the other pivots, then you must try to see whether or not we are talking about a triplicity ruler, because when that is the case, it might enhance the fortunate circumstances, the becoming eminent or having a strong position in society, in the phase belonging to the triplicity ruler, be it the first one then it's early in life, is the second one is in the second half of life. So when we do this for Hitler, we do not see it. Mercury is not a triplicity ruler of his sect-light, the sun being in the bull, and neither are moon and Jupiter. So, oh, sorry. We do have one. The moon is, of course, the second triplicity ruler of his chart, of his sect-light, and it's indeed, you can say that he became famous in the second part of his life, which is strongly emphasized also by being conjunct Jupiter Zeus, which is, of course, always a beneficent planet, albeit also perhaps to the detriment of Hitler himself, because that is what one of the statements in the earlier slides said, that whenever a benefic is a functional malefic, which is the case here for both the moon and Jupiter, then other people will benefit from it, and the person himself will not. I'm not quite sure whether or not this went for Hitler, but yeah, you could, here we have an example of that. So then the next question is one of the planets placed in a fortune angle, is it one of the spear bearers? And here we can see that Mercury is spear bearing for the sun, for Helios, Rye, because Mercury is rising before Helios, so that means that Mercury really is a spear bearer for Helios. And you find that Jupiter is a spear bearing for the moon, and they are both spear bearers for Helios. So yeah, these are pretty well placed, pretty strongly enhanced by the fortune angle. Then we can also try to see whether or not the special rulers, the special lots that Valens introduced, whether or not they function in these configurations, whether or not they are planets indeed placed in fortune angles. So let's have a look at them. Yes, here we are. We find the moon ruler of fortune is indeed in the the ruler of fortune in the crab is one of Valence's four lots, ruler of one of the four lots, of course. That's pretty clear. And Jupiter is the ruler of the bases, and he's also conjunct with the moon, of course. So that is some enhancement of eminence factors. And then we might also include the exaltation rulers, because a lot of people know that the exaltation rulers are always the joint domicile masters of any image, and they also have significations for the topics that they represent. So here we have the exaltation rulers, and then you can see indeed that both rulers of fortune are the moon and Jupiter are exceptionally strong because they are in a fortune angle, and that's pretty interesting. Okay, so let's see whether or not we can test this hypothesis of mine for other investigation, for other charts, and see what happens with them. So what I'll do now is present to you 3 example charts, whether or not they are testimony to my hypothesis, with the investigation having to do a lot with the fortune angles, and especially the fortune 10th, which is the best one to have a planet in. So let's have a look. So let's have a look at this first chart. Let's have a look at to check if my hypothesis having to do with fortune angles is really relevant and can perhaps help to establish in more detail whether or not a person is will or will not be eminent. So let's have a look. So I first locate the fortune pivots, as you should always do, and indeed we see that the sun is with a fortune in the 8th place with a lot of fortune, so that's the fortune ascendant, and we see that the fortune MC has Saturn in it, which is also of course the ruler of the lot of fortune and the ruler of the of Helios, the sun. So yeah, are there planets there? Indeed, we have Saturn in the fortune MC and the sun in the fortune ascendant, and if so, we need to check whether or not one of them is a triplicity ruler, because that might enhance the eminence in a certain period of the life of this person, if we can find one. And indeed we can. You see that the Helios is in an air-like image, and it's a day chart, so the triplicity rulers are Saturn number 1, Mercury is number 2, and Jupiter is a cooperating triplicity ruler. So yeah, that's interesting, because we now can find that Saturn is indeed strongly enhanced in the fortune MC. It's also a triplicity ruler, ruling the first period of the life of this person. So when eminence is reached, it must be relatively early in life for this person, is my guess, of course. So yeah, we have Saturn, triplicity ruler number 1, placed in the fortune MC, so that's pretty good. Are there spear bearers? Yeah, Saturn, as you can see, it's in trine. It's in a tetragonal relationship with Saturn, the planet we're talking about. So yeah, Saturn is a triplicity ruler for Helios, but it's also for Selene, because the moon is traversing towards the place where Saturn is. So yes, Saturn is also spear bearer for the moon, for Selene. That's good. Let's introduce now the lots that Valence used, the 3 extra lots. So we have a lot of spirit being in Capricorn, the basis in the Lion, and the exaltation in the Virgin. So the question then is one of them having something to do with this planet being placed in the fortune 10th? Yes. Saturn is a domicile master of both the Lot of Fortune and of the Lot of the Diamond Spirit, which is, according to Valence, a very good indication of somebody being possibly eminent. And the Sun itself is, which is placed in the location where the Lot of Fortune is also the domicile master of the Basis, being located in the Lion. So yes, this is most probably somebody who gains some sort of fame, fortune, or eminence. When we use the exaltation rulers, we can then go and check whether or not these are configured in the things having to do with the important ones, and I don't find them. And here you can see we're talking about John Travolta. John Travolta is the person probably well known to everybody who's listening or looking at this video. So yeah, he's an actor. So yeah, you can say that Saturn being placed in the Fortune 10th in his life had a lot to do with him becoming eminent. So what you see in his chart is that Saturn is specifically emphasized and describing something having to do with his the nature of his fame. And again, I repeat something that I said in another talk. Robert Schmidt pointed out in his zodiacal releasing tutorial that Saturn has a lot to do with hypokritos, theatrical performances. And of course, being an actor, you are constantly playing somebody that you are not, and that's typically something of Saturn. So yeah, that's an interesting correlation with this man and the reason of his eminence and the reason of his, in this case, also fame. I would also like to point out that when you look at these factors that I have highlighted by pointing at them with an arrow, these are not very helpful for success in the normal sense of chart evaluation. When you look at the ruler of the MC, which is Aries, Mars, which is in the 6th place of the chart, that is not very promising. And the exaltation ruler of Aries, the MC location, is the Sun, Helios, being in the 8th place. Not a place really very conducive to business, and especially not a place for being visible in the world, because the 8th place is called a shadowy place, which goes also for the 6th place and the 12th place, where we find Jupiter. Jupiter in the 12th place is of course also not a very helpful situation for any planet having to do with luck or being fortunate or being eminent, as it is in this case. And also we see the Moon being in the 3rd place, which is also not a how do you call it, a place contributing to business. So yeah, these are all pretty weak locations, and then you see this Saturn in the Fortune MC that really comes to the rescue. So that's an interesting thing to take into account. The fortune angles really have a big punch in these sort of investigations. Again, a chart to investigate my hypotheses. So let's have a look. First, of course, what I do is to locate the fortune pivots, the angles of in relation to the Lot of Fortune, and there we see the MC, and Venus is located in the Fortune MC. So are there planets there? Yes, there are. We find Venus in the Fortune MC, and we find also Jupiter and the Moon being in the Fortune 7th place of this chart. So yeah, these are pretty strong locations for these planets. They get an extra punch as the life wears on, I think, or moves on, etc. So yeah, this is a pretty strong indication, again, might contribute to eminence for this person. Is it, or is it one of them, a triplicity ruler? Well, we even have two of them, because this is a day chart with Helios, the Sun, being in the image of the crab, which is a water-like image. So yeah, we find Venus, Mars and the Moon being the triplicity rulers, and Venus is number one. It's a strong, the planet ruling the first period of life for this person. Are they spear-bearing? Let's have a look. As far as I can see, The planets I'm talking about now, placed in the fortune angles, are not a spear bearer for Helios, and nor is anyone for a spear bearer for the moon. Of course, you can see that Venus and Mercury are spear bearing for Helios, because they are rising in advance before the sun rises above the ascendant. So these are two spear-bearing planets for Helios. So they might contribute, of course. So yeah. I see now that I must have made a mistake. Simply because, indeed, yes, Venus is spear-bearing for the sun, of course. So yeah. So the triplicity ruler number 1 is also a spear bearer for the sun, so this needs to be corrected. So I stand corrected by myself. Okay, is it or one of them the ruler of Valence for special lots? When we add the 3 extra ones, and yes, we see some things happening. Venus is also the domicile master of the lot of spirit, the lot of the daimon. So yeah, that's also a contributing cause. And then we see, or try to find out whether or not the the extra domicile masters, the joint domicile masters, always being the exaltation rulers, are they contributing something to these charts? Yes, they do. The first triplicity ruler in the fortune MC is also the exaltation ruler of the basis. And the basis is, of course, in Pisces, the 4th place. The moon is triplicity ruler number 3. She's in the fortune 7th, which makes her very strong. And she is the exaltation ruler of Venus, of course, because Venus is located in the bull, of which the moon is the exaltation ruler, and also of the lot of the diamond and of spirit. So yeah, these are again contributing factors. And perhaps you saw it. Who we are talking about, this is, of course, again the chart of Lady Diana. So in Diana's chart, you can see that it's specifically Venus that is strongly emphasized by being in the fortune MC. And the interesting thing is that the way she is remembered also had a lot to do with being a young woman, being a handsome young woman, being able to give birth to an heir apparent in the royal household of the UK. And Venus is in the fortune MC, and she rose to eminence as the partner of a royal person, but it's also made her life quite difficult and unhappy at times. Perhaps that could be attributed to Venus being in the 6th place natally, but also I guess Mars in the 10th place relative to the whole sign houses. So yeah, and then you see the ruler of the 10th place being Hermes Mercury, being in the 8th place. So yeah, there was a lot of psychological stress when she became the princess. But she was also very popular, and Wiki said about that she remains one of the most popular members of the royal family throughout history, and she continues to influence the younger generation of royals. So that's interesting, and perhaps a tribute to this very excellent Venus in its own domicile. She was also the world's most photographed woman. She was a style icon, and in 2004 people cited her as one of the all-time most beautiful women, Venus, and in 2012 Time included Diana on its all-time 100 fashion icons list, which is interesting, and also of course typically Venus. So yeah, you can see that whenever you have a planet in the MC of fortune, that might contribute to the type of fame that a person gains when he or she is eminent. So here is the third chart that I want to use to perhaps illustrate my hypothesis. So let's have a look. The first thing to do is always locating the fortune angles, and in this case it's relative to the lot of fortune being in the Scorpion, and that yields these images as the fortune angles. And you can see that the fortune MC is empty, but the fortune descendant is pretty heavily populated by three very strong and well placed planets, because they are the Moon and Venus are in their respective domicile. The Moon as the exaltation ruler of the bull, and Venus as the domicile master of the bull, and they are both together with Jupiter, which is in a day chart like this one is very fortunate, of course. Yes, there are planets there. We see these three in the fortune 7th, which is the 8th natally, but this is a big boost for these planets being in a fortune angle. Is one of them placed here, one of these three, is it the triplicity ruler? Yes, then we have to look at the sect light, being Helios, the sun, is located in Aries, the ram, and yes, the second one, the second triplicity ruler being Jupiter, is the one located in the fortune descendant, in a fortune angle. So yeah, that's pretty strong again. The next question is, are there spear bearers? Yes, there are. We see that, of course, Venus and Jupiter are in the same image as the Moon, which means that they are spear bearing for Selene, which is not perhaps relevant here because we are dealing with the day chart, but in all the ancient techniques, both the Sun and the Moon are investigated whether or not they do have spear bearers, and in this case this spear bearing is very strong and excellent. But the ones that count, so of course, are then Venus and Jupiter spear bearing for Selene, the Moon. The next question is whether or not one of them is the ruler of valences for special lots. Yes, it is, because we see here now that Venus is the ruler of the exaltation, and Jupiter is the ruler of the basis, and they are all in the same image as the Moon, and they are of course located in a fortune angle. So yeah, this is a pretty strong chart. Can we see something happening when we use the exaltation rulers, the also quite important rulers, when they are seeing the image or representing it? Yes, you can see it here. You see that the Moon, of course, is the ruler of the 8th place and is, of course, located the exaltation in its own exaltation image, being the bull. So that's a good one. And you can also see that the ruler of the exaltation ruler of the 10th place is also in a fortune angle, which is in this case the fortune descendant. So yeah, here we have, again, based on all this, we must conclude that this must be an eminent person, or at least is strongly favored in the sense of becoming eminent. But this is the chart of my father, and he's the one sitting at the handles of this drag line, because that was his job in life, and he was certainly not eminent. He was in some circles known in the place where we lived, simply because he, after his retirement, he really carried on improvising people's houses by doing wallpaper and painting and such. So yeah, in that sense you could say that he had a sort of an eminence, but it was very local, and was certainly not somebody who was eminent in the sense that people all over the country knew him or knew of him. So no, it's, you can see here that the method, my hypothesis, sort of fails, because as I said before, some people mentioned that yeah, when you do this investigation, everybody is eminent, because you will always or most often find principles that I illustrated here having to do with eminence. So yeah, then you must set up everyone is capable of being eminent, which is not very helpful in delineating charts. So yeah, this is an interesting example. My guess is, and you could see that with the chart of Lady Diana as well, she also, like my dad, she had the planet Aries, Mars, in the 10th place. And that might be sort of a counter-indication for some people having to do with their eminence or their social status. My father was a working class person, and he was not well educated. So he was, let's say, a rather low class person. He was not perhaps this might be somebody who had chart factors having to do with slavery, because he was always in service of some other people. You see the boss here standing now beside the dragline for a promotion picture. The interesting thing is that what he really liked and what he was very good at was demolishing things. As you can see here, this is a church, and he demolished things all over the Netherlands after the war, after the rebuilding of the country. And he went really everywhere to work with his machine, not only to demolish things, but also to dig all sorts of canals and whatnot. So he was very active in that sense. So he traveled all over the Netherlands, and sometimes even abroad, to do this kind of work. So yeah, the question is whether or not you can say that he was eminent in a certain way, but so no, he was not eminent. He was a working class person and didn't rise very high in society. One thing that he was very good at was archery. He this is my dad in his heydays of being a very successful archer, because he was a member of the national team in the Netherlands. And you can see the type of bow that he used. All persons use such bows in these days, which weren't enhanced with all sorts of balancing stuff that you see nowadays in contests having to do with archery. So yeah, he was very good at that, and I'm proud of him because he got many awards for that. So that's very interesting, and it's also perhaps quite typical of somebody having having Helios in Aries. I have it too, because I'm also an Aries person, and I was a lot involved, and I practiced martial arts for a while, and I was very into armory and all sorts of weapons, etc., etc. That has something to do with Aries as your domicile master, and in my dad's case, it was also probably a testimony to his excellence at being a good archer and always hitting the mark. So here are we again, the little person on the right side of this picture. That's me. I think about 10 or 11 years of age. My mother beside me and my dad. So yeah. So well, to conclude this, this investigation doesn't yield the difference, because when you use it, you can see that the eminent persons that I showed in the examples are indeed favored by certain planets, but because my dad was, of course, of a lower class person, so not eminent in that sense, then we need perhaps another hypothesis or something else to investigate this issue further, and perhaps see how this then can be attributed to specific locations in a chart, making somebody very eminent. So that's something that we need to investigate now. So the question now becomes, what now? How do we investigate this issue of eminence? And how can we perhaps try to figure out which of these factors are more contributive to people being eminent or rising in society, etc. So I will not do this now. So I thank you for listening and hope to see you next time, because I then will try to investigate this further. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment and a thumbs up, and I hope to see you later. Bye.